Hello friends, this is Sanket. Our today's topic is to accessing your iPhone contact book using Addressbook framework or ContactBook framework. So now, how to access your iPhone contact book in as a simulator or as a physical device? So now it's simply we have some ready-made frameworks. It's provided by Xcode. So now let's see in the practical basics. So now create a new extra projects. So now here I am creating one single view application. My application name is here Addressbook application. Now click on next and then create. Okay, so now in today's topic we have to discuss about the different types of frameworks. Okay, according to accessing your iPhone contact book application, it means so now in your simulator you have to see the default application is there, it's a contacts. Okay, so now this application is means accessing to your application. So now how to access it? So now just simply, so now first whenever you use any different types of functionality using a framework, so now first you have to require to add a framework into your projects. So now how to add it, how to find it? So now simply just go to your root directory, and now here you can see the option build phases. Now in between there are the select a third option, a link binary with libraries, and just click on add. Okay, now you can see the pop-up window. These windows consist of so many different types of functions and libraries are there. So now for you have to access your iPhone contact book. So now actually there are two different framework for the accessing your address book, it means contact book. So now here you can see address book framework and address book UI framework. Then after according to our current iOS version, now this framework is deprecated. Okay, so now instead of you have to use contacts and contacts UI framework. Now let's try to implement one by one. So now here first I am using address book and address book UI framework, then just click on add. So now here you can see in your application one folder has been created as a framework. In this folder we have add a two framework for accessing your address book and address book framework. Now before we implementation of this framework, first you have to require to import it. Okay, so now simply first import your address book and then import your address book UI. Okay, now let's design your screen. So now here just go to your main.storyboard, and now I am started always my screen with the changing the background color. So now here first I am change the background color. Now for the designing purpose here I am creating one button. Okay, now on this button click I want to access my iPhone contact book. So now how to open it? So now let's try to design your button. So now for example here I am changing my button title, then according to change your height and width of this button. Now increase your text size, and I am changing the background color of this button. So now here this is my button. Now I want on this click to our iPhone contact book. So now how to access it? So now first we have to create the action of this button. So now simply just create action. So now here my object name is btn underscore contact. Okay, now in Xcode, so Xcode it's by default provide a lots of inbuilt framework like that. Addressbook UI, contacts UI. Now according to framework, you have to access the by default iPhone functionality in the easiest way. So now here, whenever you use any framework, it means you have to implement your application with less code. Okay, so now here, how to implement means how to access your contact book using this button. So now simply here I am creating first as an object contact book. Now for the accessing your contact book according to this framework, here we have one class, it's a AB, it means address book people picker navigation controller. Okay, so now this class is help to accessing your iPhone contact application. Now simply this is the ready-made view of your contact application. Now simply just present it. So now here present. So now using your contact book objects, it means here I am pass these objects. Now animated always true, and then completion always nil. Now here you can see one warning. Okay, so now AB people picker navigation controller was deprecated in iOS 9.0. So now what is the solution? So now here you can see use CN contact picker view controller from contacts UI dot framework instead. So now here actually in current iOS version, this framework, it means address book and address book UI framework, it's deprecated. So now at that time, the current development, you have to use a context UI framework instead of address book. But here now let's try to check these outputs, this framework is working or not. So now simply run your application, and now just hold it, your application is on the way. So now here, whenever you access the inbuilt iPhone application, okay, for example here I am accessing my iPhone contact book using address book framework, but here you have to access the inbuilt functionality of the iOS using your application, it means user defined developed application. So now how to access it? So now simply here I am implementing this functionality on this button click. So now simply button click, but here you can see the error. Okay, now in console part, what is the error? So now here you can see this app has crashed. So because it attempt to access a privacy sensitive data without user's description. It means you have to access the contact book without your device permission. Okay, so now what is the solution? So now the apps info.plist, it means in your application we have one file info.plist. So now must contain an NS contact uses description. It means this is your permission key, with you have to write a string value for accessing your contact book. Means whenever you access the inbuilt iOS application, at that time you have to write some permission in between info.plist file. So now how to write a permission? So now simply you can see the permission key is NS contact users description. So now simply copy this key and go to your info.plist. Now how to write any permission your info.plist? So now simply right click in your info.plist. Now just click on add raw, and now simply just paste your this key. Okay, now this is your key. Now actually permission is divided a key and value. So now this is your permission key. Now you have to also write the value. Okay, so now simply just press tab, and now write down your one time permission message from user. So now here whatever you want. So now here, for example, my permission message is this: application is uses your contact. Okay, so now this is my message. Now how to pop up with? So now simply again run your application. I had written a contact book permission in my info.plist file. Now let's try again. So run your application, click on this button. So now see, okay, whenever you write any permission in your info.plist, at that time this permission pop-up will be appear. So now here you can see Addressbook app, it means your application name. Okay, now would you like to access your contact? Okay, now then after I'll to use this message, it means this application uses your contact. So now here you can see the pop-up will appear, this application uses your contact. Now this is the one time permission. Okay, whenever you click on OK, so now it's defined to access your contact book. Okay, so now this is your contact book. Now then after here again I'm click on this button. Okay, so now your permission is granted to access your iPhone contact book. Okay, now here you have to select any contact, you can change, you have to modify the number, name, location, etc. Okay, so now this is the accessing a contact book using Addressbook framework. But in the current iOS version, these frameworks are deprecated. So now what is the use for the new framework? So now here you can see the warning. You have to also describe the solution. Use a CN contact picker view controller from context UI framework instead of Addressbook and Addressbook framework. Okay, so now let's try to implement our new framework. So now again simply first add your framework in your project. So now go to your build phases, then link binary with library, then click on add. Okay, now you have to also search here context and contact UI framework. So now this is the new framework for accessing our iPhone contact book. So now simply just select, click on add. Then after again before we implementing, it's required to import. So now here I'm import context and import context UI. Okay, so now here according to this framework, now let's try to implement. So now here first I am committing this code, it means old code. Now let's try to implement our new framework. So now here again I am creating one object, it's a contact book. So now for the accessing your contact using this framework, we have one class, it's a CN contact picker view controller. Okay, now you can also see here, okay, CN contact picker view controller. Now then after you have to simply just present. So now present with your contact book objects. Now animated always true and then completion always nil. Okay, now simply you have to access your contact book, simply 2-line code. Okay, so now this is the power of framework. Now again run your application and see the output. This contact framework is working or not. So now here I am accessing your contact book using context and context UI framework. Now go to your simulator, now just hold it. So now here your application is on the way. Now simply just click on this button. So now again you can see your contact book application will be appear. So now this is the contact book accessing for your button click option using, we have used first Addressbook and Addressbook UI framework, but there are the old framework, it means deprecated. So now then after we had used Context and Context UI framework. So now this is the accessing your ContactBook using Addressbook and Contact framework. Thank you.